Well, earlier this week, officials from Washington, D.C. and the Commanders have announced they're going to build a brand new stadium at the historic RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. Now, if you're not familiar with RFK, it was an NFL stadium a very long time ago, from the early 60s up until about 1966, which at that point, the Redskins at that time moved out to Landover, Maryland, where they built a new stadium that was sort of part of a deal when the Browns decided to move to Baltimore. That I won't go too deep into the weeds, but those stadiums were built around the same time because people wanted funding for one thing or the other. But anyway, so they've been out there since 1996, but it was a very fast built stadium, very rushed, very inadequate for today's standards because of the situation that it was in. We can discuss that more later. But this new deal brings the team back to Washington, D.C., and if you haven't been following, it's been 3 or 4 years now that there's been this whole stadium saga. Will the team move to Virginia? Will the team move to Maryland? Dan Snyder has to sell the team first. And it's amazing, actually, since Dan Snyder has sold the team, how much has changed in regards to both the Commanders, but also the specific stadium details and the stadium search. And so everyone gets really excited over all these renderings and all the glossy details. They talk about funding. Oh my gosh, there's public funding. And I've been following this as long as the saga has been going on, because I've actually been very interested in the history of RFK, more so than just a football stadium, because actually RFK was originally supposed to be the bookend of the National Mall with the Lincoln Memorial. There's actually this whole second half of the National Mall that was never built. If you look at a map, which I conveniently have pulled up, you'll see here's RFK, here's the Capitol building, here's Washington Monument, here's the Lincoln Memorial. It's all in line, and you can see like the streets are sort of laid out in a way that could have been used to build this other second half of the mall. And obviously the idea for the mall came first before all the monuments that were actually built were decided upon. But anyway, I digress. So originally there was going to be this huge national stadium. It was going to be for the Olympics. This was at the turn of the century in the 1900s, so the Olympics was really the only major sporting event at the time. They were going to host presidential inaugurations here. There were foreign influences that, other countries had done something similar. Why can't the U.S. have this grand 100,000 seat stadium, which at the time, given there were no other stadiums, was just an incredible idea. Unfortunately, can never get funding for it, and so the bills to bring this idea forward just died. And finally, by the mid-50s, the NFL started to become a thing, and Congress justified building a stadium for NFL purposes. So it was really it became where it was this grandiose idea that just got dumbed down to just a typical metal-framed NFL stadium, which is unfortunate, because I think a national stadium would have been really cool. But you guys didn't come for history lesson. You came for details about the stadium, which I know is what you're all excited about. Now, there are a couple of complications to dealing with the RFK site, because like I said, it was the federal government that built the stadium. And it technically was managed by the Forest Service, I think, maybe the National Park Service later on. But anyway, federal control. So the very first step was getting Dan Snyder out of the Commanders organization, or the Redskins at that time. He was a very bad owner. Nobody liked him. Very much did things to piss off fans. Did not run the team very effectively. Was a very scrappy owner from a financial standpoint. Treated his employees terrible. All that went public. No one liked him. Had to get him out before before DC was even willing to accept the idea of the Commanders coming to DC. That happened. Then the next step was to get D.C. control over the land from the federal government. Now, obviously, D.C. was never intended to be a city of its own. It was always expected to be the capital of the United States, but has since sort of evolved into a city of its own. It's got neighborhoods, it's got residents, it's got schools, it's got grocery stores, whatever. So, but over time, the federal government has offloaded various pieces of land to D.C., which have been successful redevelopments. For example, I don't know how quick I can find it, but the wharf, I think this is a wharf. I'm not from DC, so don't get me on this. But anyway, there was a whole area over here that was sold to DC, and which was subsequently, through a public-private partnership, was redeveloped. There's a couple other examples, like a federal hospital comes to mind that may have been what that was. So there have been projects in the past where land's been given from the federal government to DC to redevelop, and it's worked. But like I said, there was this whole, we have to get the land to DC first. And it took multiple years to make that happen, because you have to remember, Washington, D.C. does not have a voting member of Congress. They have representation, but that person is not a voting member. So in order to have Congress pass a bill or something to give DC control requires someone else from somewhere else doing that, inserting it into their bill. And so actually that happened. After like the third or fourth attempt, they got a bill that passed. It was, I don't even think it was a bill, it was a resolution or something like that to give DC control over the land. And actually, I think it had to be a bill for a formal sale, because in the resolution, all they did was just change the terms of the lease. Originally, the lease said the only thing that could go in this spot was it had to be sports and recreation based. So that's why you see here, this used to all be parking lot, like it is over here, and they redeveloped this into recreational fields, because that's all they could do with the lease. They couldn't sell the land, they couldn't build neighborhoods there, they couldn't do anything with it. But the resolution gives them more control. Now, I was originally very confused. I thought DC wanted to own the land. So why could that not happen? Why did it have to be another lease? That's what I don't understand. So I think there's going to be some nuances and there's going to be some strings attached. They're going to make this process a little bit more complicated because of that. And you also have the DC Armory here. Obviously, that's owned by the federal government, but you've got parking lots, got a little boulevard here, more parking lot over here. And when they redevelop this, according to the plan, they want to use all of this area. But if you're observant like I am, and I actually went to this site. I've got photos and video of me being here. I walked around the site, even though it was abandoned. There was security, like light security, but you could still like walk around it. There's no like fences or anything over here. I think the parking lots were fenced off, but you can go up right up to the door on all sides. And obviously when I was there, it wasn't as demolished as it is now. I say demolished. I think they've just done asbestos abatement, and then they removed all the bleachers. I think they demolished the first level of grandstands inside the stadium. All that was there when I was there. As a matter of fact, the stadium was overgrown. There were like junk cars in here, which is like, how does a junk car get inside a stadium? There's junk laying everywhere. So this is actually comparatively cleaned up to what I saw when I was there. But you'll notice that, look, like here's the stadium. Here's the outline of where the stands were. And here's the door. Like, you can stand right up against the entryway, which they weren't doors, by the way. This is an open air concourse. I guess I can show it to you really quickly from the side. If you can see it. Yeah, you can see, like, here's the ramps. There's the inside of the stadium, barely. You can see it through the light. But you can see it's an open air stadium. It's not enclosed at all, except for some of the club spaces. Which, yes, there are club spaces. I know that's hard to believe. But, like, you can stand here. There's a little turnstile with, like, a fence over it, like you would, like, at a bank or something. And you can see right into the stadium. Like, it is not very wide or thick or dense, whatever word you want to use. It is maybe 20 feet across from this door to, like, the inside of the stadium. Which, modern stadiums are not like that at all. It's almost like you have an entire fortress of buildings surrounding the entire area. You have clubs and concession stands and concourses and bathrooms. And so this is not the size of a modern stadium at all. And I've not done any analysis to suggest how this compares, but I'm looking at this and I'm looking at here's Independence Avenue. I guess this is called C Street. I don't see how a new stadium is going to fit here. Like, that's my point. Like, a new stadium is going to at least be 125 to 150% the size of this stadium. And without, like, major changes to the road layout, I don't know how you do that. I don't know. I'm not a civil engineer. I'm not sure if you can make these curves wider. And you'll notice, like, how is there a major road here, but then the parking lot's over here? It's because there's tunnels. So, like, to move this road would not just be, like, the easiest endeavor in the world. So I've got a lot of questions about how this is going to be. I have a big feeling that... Now, let me start this. Let me say this first. The renderings that they've showed are not accurate. They don't have any renderings yet. They have the inside of the stadium. That's not really much of anything. We have no idea what the stadium's going to look like. We know it's going to have a roof. We know it's going to have 65,000 seats, which puts it in the same ballpark as the new stadiums being built now. The Buffalo Bills Stadium probably is a little bit closer in size to what this will be. It's a little bit smaller, but has more seats. Versus the Tennessee Stadium has a lot more open concourses, a lot more like lounge space. It's a lot bigger in terms of like physical like square footage. I don't think that's something that's going to fit here. That, and the other thing that you'll notice is like there's nothing around this. Like it's all neighborhoods. Like once DC gave up on building the second half to the mall, which deserves a video of its own, all this just got bought up and developed into housing. And so that's why, like, a lot of the blowback from not a lot of them, but there's like 3 or 4 council members on the DC council who've been very opposed to building a stadium at all, because it wouldn't benefit any of the neighbors. Like, they want grocery stores, they want parks, they want places for them. How does a stadium fit into that? Now, because the stadium's always been here, the metro stop, which is over here, this is actually called, Stadium Armory. It's always been called that, even while RFK's been closed. Now, RFK isn't completely abandoned. It technically has been abandoned since 2019, but from 1996 to like I'm trying to think. 1996 to 2004, I don't think it had any tenants. 2004 to like 2000, I don't know. Maybe I might be getting my dates wrong, but 2004 to some date, like 2011, the Nationals played here when they moved here from Montreal. And then after they left, there was the DC United that played here until 2019 when they built their own stadium, but it's been abandoned ever since. So maybe if you're familiar with RFK Stadium, you've seen it in one of those abandoned videos or exploration videos. Because it is kind of weird. It's since the Pontiac Silverdome has been demolished, this is the largest abandoned stadium in the country, and it's only blocks away from the Capitol building. That's kind of crazy. That, and every aerial photograph of the Capitol building taken from the west, so like in this area, taken looking that way, you always see RFK in the background. To me, it's something that stands out to me immediately because I know it's there, but most people don't know it's there. That's how it is. So, question marks for me. Will the stadium fit? I don't think so. They want to build this whole district, which I think is great, and hopefully it satisfies a lot of the council members' objections, because they're going to build like 6,000 homes. I actually have a diagram up here. There we go. They're going to build like 6,000 homes. They're going to build restaurants. It's basically going to be like every other stadium now that's being built, regardless of sport. It's going to be a stadium, which they're saying is going to fit within the same footprint. That's a stretch. And then there's going to be like a mixed-use district around it. I think, the Kingman Park that's over here, that'll be housing. This will be like the restaurants and retail space. This will just be a trail along the river. They'll probably leave. They're saying they're going to leave the park here, which all this is turf fields. This is like turf fields. There's like a paver pathway here and some fencing, and that's it. There's not really a whole lot here. They could tear it down and build it into something else, but I guess that's their sort of how they're saying they're going to use. That's going to be their park space, I guess. Now, DC, at least what Mario Bowser has put out at Events DC, which manages all the parks and stuff, their like master plan, regardless of what the Commanders were doing, regardless of whether Dan Snyder was there, always included a stadium. They never talked about it, but it always included a stadium. So they were always very set on bringing this to reality. But the practicality of it has remained to be seen. Now, what's shocking to me is how much private money is going into this. They're saying it's going to be a $3.8 billion project. That includes the stadium. That includes the district. And that includes about $1 billion that's going to infrastructure. And the infrastructure actually is going to be paid for by existing revenue streams that relate only to sports facilities. So I don't know if that includes like admission to parks or tournaments, like youth tournaments that are hosted at these sites, or I'm not sure how that money is sort of allocated. But I mean, I've never had an issue with public money going towards infrastructure. I mean, I get it's a huge project, it requires lots of money to make happen and resources, but I've never had a problem with like the city paying for infrastructure. Like that's their job. The water, the sewer, the roads, like that's their thing. Like that's expected that they should pay for that on every project pretty much, in my opinion. But anyway, I'm not from DC. I'm not a resident, so I don't get to have an opinion. But what's happened with like the Tennessee Stadium, and this has become more of a trend, is where it's not publicly funded, it's publicly financed, where the stadium will pay for itself over time using tax dollars that it generates. So the municipality will sell bonds to the developers that are then paid back using tax dollars from the stadium. which to me, like, okay, the stadium pays for itself. How can you complain? Now, Josh Harris is a very rich guy, runs Apollo Capital Management, has been doing it since the early 90s. He's a big private equity firm, multi-billion-dollar company, does really well for himself. I'm still shocked because he also owns the 76ers and they want to build their own stadium as well. Obviously, they backed out of that for completely different reasons than this situation, but they're going to build a new stadium in partnership with the Phillies, and that's going to be complicated, and they need to put money towards that as well. So how they have the private funds or can justify the cost of building the stadium, not only the district, I'm really surprised by. I mean, $2.7 billion is not a small chunk of change. And I got to imagine that it's right now they're painting it as it's private financing. It's private money. It's all private. Where I think the funding package is probably going to be a little bit more nuanced. It's probably going to come up in some form of cash from the Commanders and Josh Harris. It's going to be some sort of financing. And it's also probably going to be a loan from the NFL, which will be, in the past, it's been around, I think, $200 million. I mean, I'm not sure if they adjust that for inflation or how that might be reflected here, but obviously that's not a huge chunk. $200 million is not a huge chunk of $2.7 billion. And I got to imagine as well, the stadium's not going to cost, I mean, $2 billion, that's kind of actually, compared to the stadiums that are being built now, $2 billion is not a lot, because I got to imagine that $2 billion alone will be allocated to this. Maybe more. I mean, it just depends on how much private developers they can recruit to build these other parts of the district. That's the biggest question mark in my view. But anyway, I'm really getting too far into the weeds for what you all are interested in this video. I don't want to make this too long, but I have a lot of opinions about this, obviously. So let's take a couple steps back. So the Commanders' lease ends in 2027. They're projecting this will be open by 2030. So obviously they'll sign a 3-year lease extension in Maryland. They'll build a new stadium here with a roof, 65,000 seats. We don't know much more than that, unfortunately. We know how much it's going to cost. In terms of next steps, the DC Council has not passed this. This is just a deal that Muriel Bowser and Josh Harris thought would be possible to pass, is how I'll say it. But the DC Council has some people that are very much against this, have been against building a stadium from the very beginning, will not have their mind changed. They're saying all these events will come. A Super Bowl may come. I think DC's a big enough market that may actually happen. And I think the NFL, this is outside of Los Angeles, this was the market they were really pushing to redevelop or to bring back. So I think that might actually happen. But all these other events like the Final Four, maybe the World Cup, like the Women's World Cup, might come here. Concerts, obviously, because it's a big metro area. But like the Final Four, it's kind of a stretch. And it's not going to, they're claiming it's going to be used like 280 days a year. I don't think that's going to happen. That is the other big complaint by the council members, is that these stadiums don't get used very much. They only get used but a couple days a year. And I think that will probably also be the case here. But anyway, this will take a long time to negotiate. And then once they negotiate it, they have to put together the final like engineering details. They have to put together the renderings, a site plan, and that all has to be publicly released for like the public to provide feedback to know they're on the right track. Then they'll send out bids for construction. And so they're estimating that they'll break ground late in 2026 and be done in about 3 years. I mean, Josh Harris, I trust him. I believe that to be accurate. It just depends on how much the DC Council pushes back. I'm excited though. It's a shame that RFK has to be torn down, but it's not like it's worth saving. There's nothing super historic that happened there besides what the Redskins fans or the Commanders fans think is historic to their own history. I'm excited. This is what I think everybody wanted. Virginia made some really hard pushes to get the stadium there. A lot of tax benefits, some good properties with a lot of promise of development. I know Maryland really wanted to keep the team there, although I didn't really hear much of what they were proposing to do. So let me know what questions you have. I'll do more research and we'll make more update videos as more information is released and sort of digested. These are my initial thoughts. That's some background on the project, and we'll see where things go from here. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. We'll see you in the next video.